a short Q&A, if anyone's interested in that. Well, maybe when I unmute my parents. Who's bleeding?
I'm bleeding. Dustin.
Kids are on the floor. I guess I could ask my dancer something first. I can't remember. Was there something different about tonight as opposed to dance workshop performing at Fern?
Yeah, I think that this piece responded to this space in a very different way than Armstrong, and having a smaller crowd, more intimate setting. It felt more right for this piece, I think, than dance workshop did.
And able to control transitions, I think it's really nice. And then have it end. It's very much an ending.
Yeah.
Right there, as opposed to going to a completely different piece.
I felt a lot more present in my body performing in this space. I think during DW I was more aware of the scale, the spectacle of the event, and sort of hitting marks. This time I feel more present.
I feel more connected with everyone as a whole, especially the last part when you were doing the lift. I feel like I wasn't just myself, I was actually just being embodied with everybody. Yeah, as to dance workshop, I was more with the audience. What do you think?
I liked our last change to not being completely silent watching the video, watching it so that because as I was listening to the music, it was overwhelming me, and I felt like we were pushing encompassing you guys.
There's this when I was teaching this, choreographing it, I had towards the end some water imagery that I really talked about with Isabel and stuff. Filtered and kind of cleanse over time until it's a more supportive kind of substance. And then at the very end, I had the idea of us being pretty much through with it and able to pass it back to the world. And I think there was a little bit of that in the solo in the beginning. And then of course there's the water you can hear at the end of the music, which is just so beautiful.
Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I have a comment. I actually liked it much better over in this space than over in Armstrong, because I felt that I could really look at the expressions on your face, and I could see a lot of subtleties and the things that you were doing as an ensemble and the changing dynamics of the relationships. And I just found it was much more powerful over here than in Armstrong. And just on a technical note, just since the last time I've seen it, I just felt that there was more of a continuous flow through the whole piece, other than pauses and wait for the next thing to happen. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, let's get ready. Okay, do this thing.
Surprisingly, lighting design played a little bit into that,
Yeah,
making things seem like they
that.
flowed more. We tried to make it more seamless, I think. Thanks, RJ/Robert. Yeah, so I mean, I talked with Sean and Patricia a whole lot about that, and even something that's not within the choreography itself can have a huge impact on how it's perceived and how it seems to connect. So, yes.
Where did you get the idea for that transition from the violence and the aggression at the beginning to what thought inspired that?
That'll be hard. No, I mean, I could probably think of something.
When did it occur to you that slowing it down would change it so drastically?
Okay, the idea came from a long time ago in Eiko and Koma's piece. It centers around transmutation. How can you enact one thing to become its opposite. So I also saw an installation in the TBA festival in like 2010, 11. Ryan Flatt's class went to see it, and an artist named Jesse Sugarman had put together an installation where there were a bunch of like hatchbacks, and a bunch of underneath were all these uninflated mattresses, and they slowly inflated over time so that these extremely slow-mo car accidents were happening. And he used the word cozy violence, which is a complete oxymoron. And that stayed in my head until Aiko and Coma's class, and I started messing around with my perception of speed and violence. And I found some actions, once they started, if they started fast, they were violent, but if you slowed them down to like an extremely slow speed, their meaning changed completely, even without you having to assign them any meaning. So I could be falling down the stairs. If I were to do that in real life, I'd break my neck, but if I did it ever so slowly, it was a back massage, it was enjoyable. It was, in fact, the complete opposite of the original motion. And then that kind of just started me on this whole series of what kind of movements can I do that are bad at one speed and good at another. And I found that I could just follow that as a path, and your emotions kind of just fill in the blanks, as opposed to saying this is how I should feel because it does feel good. Hitting someone becomes caressing them. Biting becomes kissing. Holding some, bashing their head against their knees becomes slowly placing it in their lap. And it just made me feel good to know that there's a way to change everything just by slowing it down. And I wanted to move into metaphor with that, because I'm starting to think that in real life you can take that and slow it down and find a lot more meaning in what we've found to be terrible events. And there's more beyond that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting, like, I know that the first time that Raptor had talked to me about the piece, we started by playing with certain actions, and how do we change that action from one thing to another. And it was different in some cases. Some were speed, some were much more about like the intention behind your actions. But in almost all of the cases, we started with a violent action and tried to change that into like a peaceful or loving action, which I think is actually really important that we started that way and not the other way around, making peaceful things violent, because the piece really is about...
It's about from one to the other and working backwards.
Yeah, and like going through peace. And Raptor had talked to me about how violence doesn't necessarily have to be a choice, how we occasionally like lapse into violence as the norm, or like the normative process that we're undergoing. And so to try to look at that and like slow that down and change it was really important in the process, I think.
This was one of my favorite ones because I think it's the most vicious one, and it's also the most gentle at the end once it's changed. That one translated so well as we started calling it. Like, which movements translate really well seem to be the ones that have the greatest disparity with the least amount of like physical differences between them. The first word that I started on in my thesis journey, not necessarily like what are the meanings of the works, was discomfort. And I felt compelled to make it difficult. So physically, that was hard, and in a way I think was kind of necessary, because towards the end, I mean, at least Dustin and myself were really tired. You can see, probably because of this intimate space, you can see the actual shaking going on. It just, how wiped you get towards the end. And so I subscribe to exhaustion theory. I really feel like you strip away some of your performative elements, some of your awareness of the audience, and other kind of not very important things when you do get tired, so that you really are just forced to focus on the essential things. And I did, a lot more than even the first run we did, only a couple of hours before performance, which just felt like a practice as opposed to an experience. So, I mean, I could talk about some of the imagery I had for that solo, but I wanted to have a very good complementary piece at the beginning that kind of set the mood without being a prequel to it.
What was your imagery? Will you share some?
Okay, well. Okay. I started from a place of war, I think, and the war that really resonates with me the most, at least American-involved war, is World War I. And I went through a phase of huge interest in the kind of younger World War I soldiers, especially the French. So there were a lot of teenagers in that war, and it was a pretty traumatic experience for all countries involved. So the song that was used was called Bleuet, and it was composed by Poulenc. And Bleuet is the nickname for the teenage soldiers that were French. They're called cornflowers. And there were some regiments that had that cornflower blue uniform, and that was the nickname for them too. So I just thought of being 18, 19, going through something where you could lose a limb. You're really lonely even though you're around people who are around your age. I really just think of it as such a traumatic, bleak, colorless, lifeless event that scarred people. It definitely scarred the land, and it's only now really healing. And it just has such long reach, even though it was 100 years ago. It just seems like the most immediate to me. So I couldn't get away from having kind of a militaristic, authoritative imagery, just the kind of things that people were forced to do, peeling themselves away until personality isn't the same anymore. Really just, I feel like we've gone on a new trajectory as a world since that point in time. And I don't know if the way technology is advancing is making it any better. I mean, people can move around more, but definitely that was the imagery I started with, and really in light of events from yesterday, it did take on new meaning. So I started with the idea of youth and the idea of even younger people, children, less defensive people who aren't old enough to bear arms, to even speak for themselves, started seeping in. And I have a younger brother in elementary school. That's where your mind goes. So it just made me think of young boys playing at war and how we kind of teach them to play at battle, and how when it actually happens, it's nothing like play. It's completely inconceivable. I've never actually heard of anything as devastating to a group of young children in America as this. You have to put
I like that idea of playing violence and
which is what we're doing.
the actuality of violence. I think that actually carries over really well to the second piece as well.
Because that's what we're doing. We're not really beating each other up, although I think I hit you
Yeah.
harder.
I hit you pretty hard
Sorry.
in the head.
So yeah, there was some play violence. I think that is the closest we've gotten to real danger. But it seemed right. It seemed at least towards a purpose. I think tonight. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not hurting.
Okay.
Just bounce from the adrenaline. I mean, just in terms of like the technical parts of it, that was something really interesting to work on, because it was so important to show a realistic portrayal of violence.
Yeah,
we
it
had
was-
taken that stage combat class,
Yeah.
which really
we took
that
a
just-
stage. We took a stage fighting workshop, and it so like at the same time as we were sort of starting to work on this piece, and so we were like, oh, what can we take from this stage combat? And it turned out absolutely nothing for this particular piece, because stage combat is all about playing at violence.
Yeah,
and
complete reduction
It
of
was
risk.
really a really big thing was figuring out what we could do that was real and still, I mean, be able to perform it more than once.
Yeah.
You know? Which is why some of these movements like grabbing the face work so well, because they're so violent, yet we don't actually have to hurt each other. So it was kind of like a process of refining, you know, do you want to pretend to hit someone, or do you want to do a violent action that we can actually do to each other, so that we're not just playing at violence? Because I think that that's, I don't know, to be playing at violence seems like almost an insult to the topic.
I don't know, I think when you mentioned the word play violence, it really struck me too that like the degree of playing violence, you can play it down so that you're pretending to hurt someone, but Isabel and I are in Echo's class, Naked and Delicious, and we've been talking a lot about World War II and the violence in it. And in some ways, I don't want to use the word play violence because that was not the intention, but it was just like so many people, so many innocent people were hurt from that. And so that wasn't the direct intention. So I think there's such a degree of violence, and like your intention comes into play as well, and how other people can be affected through your action. Yeah.
I think it had to hurt because we've already been to the end, and it's hard not to think of where it ends up. Like, we have a resolution that's in the back of our minds, and I could just be going through the motions knowing that the good part's coming up, and we need to start in the wrong place. And I think it helps so much to have, like, I have these skin wounds now, and to get angry,
Yeah.
which I do. I get mad, I get reactive every time we're in that circle together. It really, you have to dip before you can climb every time. Any questions from the audience?
Unfortunately, I have to leave to go to another meeting that starts at
That's really good. You have
Yeah.
10 minutes.
I think we're probably
I think that was good. Thank you for your questions.
probably good. Yeah, thank you guys.
Comments.
Coming.
That's from what They're going to start a new one. I know.